Okay. So I'm starting a new series. It's called Saucy Opinions. It's where I state, I guess these are like, I don't know, my guides or my tips on how to be a better Maple Story player. But like, they're opinion based, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. Today the topic of the day is how to be a better Kanna. And when I say better Kanna, I mean in the context of bossing or like if you are a bind mule, not necessarily like a primary contributor to damage. It's usually when you're just going along the, to either get a carry or get some lucid souls, or if you're just helping another party out. I do run a Kanna in other bossing parties, and I've been doing that for at least a year. I think I'm okay at it. I'm still not the best. I still forget a lot of things like my bind timers, and occasionally I get caught up in chatting with the team that I forget about some calls. But overall, I think I have enough experience that I can impart some knowledge. So let's talk about, I have like 5 things that you kind of need, like not need, but is very helpful to know when you are a Kanna on a bossing party. The first thing you need to know is you want to have max domain. And this is like super obvious, right? Like if you don't have max domain, your function to the party is like kind of significantly diminished. This is obviously not a hard requirement. Some parties that are weaker, if you're doing like a weaker boss, having max domain is not necessarily a requirement. It's just kind of expected. I think max domain is like a nice to have, and if you don't even have that baseline, I don't think like hard boss carries would want to take a Kanna without a max domain, because then the expectation is if you don't have max domain means you haven't been farming for that long, you don't have enough nodes, and if you don't have enough nodes means you don't really have that much experience with the game. That kind of comes with the territory. The next thing is you kind of want to know how your skills work, aka read your skills. It's not something that people mention, so I feel like this should be harped on a little bit more. I think a lot of people don't know how their skills work, and they don't read their skills. And if you're partying as a kind of like a mule situation where you're primarily supporting the party and you're not really doing a lot of DPS, I think it's very important that, well, even if you are at a primary DPS, it's very important for you to know your skills. But as a Kanna, if you don't know your skills, you're kind of not going to be very helpful to the party, and in fact, you might even frustrate some party members. So let's talk about some skills that you may want to know. I guess this is a heads up. If you're not going to read your skills later on, at least you listen to this and you kind of know a little bit more about your skills. The first one, the very obvious one that you should know, is what your bind's duration is and what your bind cooldown is. So if you didn't know, most people do 2-minute binds, or they go off of the cooldown of your foot bind. And the foot bind is called Veritable Pandemonium. It has a bind timer, or it binds the boss for about 15 seconds. The next very obvious thing that you should know that is not readable, is not a thing that you can find in the skills, is how big the hitbox is. So meaning, if you are in a certain location, can you hit the boss if the boss is below you, or if the boss is above you, or how far the boss to the right or to the left of your character is, and when it would hit the boss. So this is not as obvious. You kind of have to experiment around, maybe go to some mobbing maps, try using your bind in different areas to see if you hit the boss in from different areas, or see if you can hit mobs from different areas of the map. You also want to be learning about binding Tempest. So that's the other bind skill that you have. It has the same cooldown, 120 seconds, as Veritable Pandemonium. But the only thing is that it lasts for only 10 seconds as opposed to 15 seconds. So you should be using Veritable Pandemonium. But if you do miss a bind, do know that Binding Tempest is there. Learn how to charge domain with and without Vanquisher's Charm. Find go to an open map, or go to a town where there's not a lot of people, and charge your domain. See how long it takes to charge. See what's the most efficient way to charge your domain. Next, where do you place and how? So not how, but when and where do you place your barriers, aka Blossom Barrier for defense and Bellflower Barrier for damage. As much as you possibly can, put them on Banes. When you have bombs, you want to put down Blossom Barrier to make sure that you protect your teammates and tell them where the barrier is. So the next thing that you kind of want to know about that's kind of more obscure is how to manage your mana. You want to be making sure that you have enough mana to cast Domain when you need to cast Bind when you need to. and to be able to charge your domain when you cast domain. Um, and like learning how to manage that is kind of like an experience thing. So definitely by playing more Kanna or bossing on your own, like doing some maybe easier bosses in practice mode, you'll learn a little bit more about that through experience. A quick tip is that if you were to use mana balance, in some bosses where you can't heal, you might put yourself in a very difficult situation. So you want to be using your skills very sparingly. Like don't summon boss in, for example, phase 2. That's like a big example. Like because if you are forced to use mana balance in will phase 2, you're very likely to die, and then you become less helpful for your teammates, especially if you fail a test. Next, we're talking about the most important thing to know is that Sengoku Force is horrible when you are just being carried and you're in phase 3 Lucid. If you're in phase 2 Lucid and you're about to go into phase 3, do not summon your Sengoku Force. It is very, very hard to cancel it. I don't think there is a way. The only way you can cancel Sengoku Force, I believe, in phase 3 is if you die and you don't use buff freezers. I think that's the only way. Sengoku Force is a active, aggressive attacker. So if you get into the boss box room, like the bonus room, and there's the Lucid box there, you can destroy the box by just having Sengoku Force on. Another way you can accidentally destroy the box is if you have Yuki summoned and you have Circle of Suppression on. So right before going into the box phase, this is very specific to phase 3 Lucid, turn off Circle of Suppression. It's very important. Don't get your party members pissed at you. I kind of did that once. My first Kanna run on a H Lucid carry. And I broke the box. And I got a Kanna fan drop. Sorry to my teammates, but I got a drop, so I don't. Next, know your boss timers. Most Kannas that are just purely being support are being brought on to be a help. And it will be very helpful if you learn about certain boss timers or boss mechanic timers. These are not so necessary in bosses like Damien and Lotus, but very, very helpful in bosses like Lucid, Will, Vihilla, Gloom. Darknell, not so much. Actually, Darknell, there's no real timer. But learning when golems drop, learning when learning about will phases, like when the tests are supposed to happen, like noting them and remembering them, and remembering to remind your teammates of when those timers are. Vihilla is a very important one. That one's much harder to learn the timings. I still don't know the timings of that, but I also don't run support for Vihilla. But yeah, learning all those timers. I'm not gonna explain the timers here. I can make a mechanics video. If you guys are interested, leave a comment below. Subscribe to the channel if you that will help me quite a lot. But yes, if you're interested in something like a Will Lucid timer / mechanics video, I'm happy to make something like that if there's significant interest. Number 4, learn about your party composition. So if you are in a Lucid party or a Will party, and you have, or let's say Lotus or Damien, I guess it doesn't really matter which kind of boss you're doing, but if you're in a party with multiple members and some of them are heavily burst-oriented classes, you want to be making sure that you understand their burst cooldown patterns and when you want to be charging domain. Usually, here's the pattern. You do every 2 minutes you do a bind. The first bind will be a burst bind. The second at the 2-minute mark will be a non-burst bind, and at the 4-minute mark will be a burst bind. Occasionally, somebody messes up on your party and like either pops benediction early or pops, combo instinct early or late, or spread throw late, and it means that their burst is slightly going to be beyond that 4-minute mark. You want to be making sure that you are aware of that before charging domain. So if somebody says, I'm 40 seconds away from my spread throw being up, don't charge domain even though your bind cooldown is up. And I think this is very important so that you learn how to resync the team so that everybody bursts together. Lastly, at number 5 is you should learn how to do the boss as a DPSer. So if you're doing this on a Kanna that's your main, I don't think this is going to be as much of a problem because you're probably going into the boss as not just somebody who's trying to get a carry. You're probably also going in as, you trying to be helpful as a DPS source as well as a support. But if you are a separate main and this is your Kanna farmer and you want to get some Lucid Souls or you want to get some equip drops, it is very important that you not only know how to do the boss as a Kanna, because then you won't be as helpful. The reason why you want to know how to do the boss as a DPSer as well on your main is that you learn when is a good time to bind, when is a bad time to bind. That's like a very commonly seen in situations like Damien, where like a sword lands really near where Damien is, and for example, you're a Night Lord and you have to be really close to do a burst bind or to do like significant damage. So if you're a Kanna and you don't know about these things and you just bind the boss whenever you see the boss, you may bind the boss in a situation that's not ideal for your DPS or DPS, and then they lose 5 seconds on the bind, which is kind of not very helpful. And lastly, being a DPSer in a boss, you're more likely to learn about what kind of shot calling is helpful and what kind of shot calling is not helpful. Some good examples of not helpful shot calling: when you speak too much, cluttering the voice chat or the voice call, that's not very helpful. If you don't call out your binds like 5 seconds before you bind a boss, that's not very helpful. Like just calling out the bind right as you bind is like not super helpful if you don't warn your party members of like when you're about to bind. Why? I can go ahead and explain why. Because, for example, let's say Lucid is doing some lasers or Damien's in the air dropping some Cheetos on you. You go, I'm going to bind right after he comes down. This allows your party members to buff up, and when Lucid reappears or Damien comes down, you bind the boss, they can go immediately into DPSing without losing time buffing up at the first part of the bind. Yeah, I guess one last tip that I can throw in there too is that it is like the best time to bind a boss is usually after they do an animation. So for example, like Lucid Laser, Lucid Touch, Sickles, Damien's Cheetos, Damien's dash with the like phase 2 Damien where he slashes with like the lines that kill you in one hit, or like dive. Basically when the bosses reappear, that's like usually the best time to bind a boss. But yeah, I think that's all the quick tips that I have for you today. If you have more questions or if you have more tips that I've missed out, feel free to drop them in the comments. I stream on Mondays and Wednesdays for sure, and a flex weekend, so Friday, Saturday, or Sunday at twitch.tv/saucems. Feel free to drop by, say hi, tell me off if I got something wrong. Anyways, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching.